Joining us now to discuss Charlie Kirk's historic memorial in Arizona on Sunday is Jane Hampton Cook, presidential historian, award-winning author, and former White House staffer. First of all, good afternoon to you, Jane. Good to see you. Now, nearly every cabinet member from the Trump administration attended, and both the president and vice president spoke. Can you talk to us about how rare is this, where we see a memorial for a private citizen that's drawing this level of national attention?
We really haven't seen this in our history in a very, very long time. The Martin Luther King assassination comes to mind as something that was similar, but here we have someone who was a private citizen, Charlie Kirk, and he was an influencer. And to have all of these cabinet members come, and they didn't just come to honor him, they knew him. They had had dialogues with him. They had text messaged with him, and the same for President Trump that this was someone they knew well. And yet you realized yesterday after watching that memorial just how many people Charlie Kirk knew and communicated with regularly. And that was really just part of the way he operated. And I think it was a beautiful tribute, and it was very meaningful, and it was long, but it was just impactful. And I think in a way we haven't seen, especially in the last few decades.
You know, Jane, if we look back on this moment, say 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, where the memorial filled an NFL stadium and was watched by millions more online, how do you think this memorial will be remembered? How might historians look back on this day?
I don't know exactly, but I think that they will recognize that this was a watershed moment, especially if we see a revival or a restoration, a rebirth, especially among Gen Z. And we see evidence that may be what's happening, a revival. We've had the great reformations in our past history, and great awakenings, and so I think this will be viewed that way. And from a spiritual perspective, I don't know that I have ever heard a widow who was only 11 days after the tragic event offered to forgive the assailant. And it was done in a you could tell it was just very hard for her to say that, but it was important for her to say that. And I think that moment will stand out, well beyond in the years ahead.
Can I ask you, what were you feeling when you first heard that message of forgiveness from Erica Kirk?
I was thinking and feeling, could I have done that? Would I have been able at that moment to offer forgiveness? And you saw that President Trump was really surprised by it too, and he recognized that he didn't have that in him. And it's amazing how it just I think it made people soul search a little bit. What would I have done? And I think it just helps us respect her even more for being able to do that. To even if it's just to try, to try to do that alone is significant. And I think that's one that one part of the memorial will really stand out in the decades to come.
You know, I was really blown away when I saw that. And you mentioned it's just been 11 days, right? If it were me and I was in her shoes, I mean, it'll probably take me like years and years before I will be able to even talk about forgiveness. And she could do it in less than 2 weeks. It's extremely remarkable, the strength that she
Yes.
has in this aspect. I want to also talk to you about the legacy, the impact that Charlie Kirk had on this nation. What really resonated with you about his vision for America?
I was really impressed with his ability to go on a college campus and have a prove me wrong session where people who disagreed with him, students, could come to the microphone. He wanted the ones who disagreed with him to come to the front of the line, and he would dialogue with them. And he did it in a very respectful way. And I think we have lost in this country, on college campuses in particular, the ability to have differences of opinion and to walk through those differences in a way that's not threatening, in a way that doesn't, provoke anger. And I think Charlie Kirk's ability to do that was really phenomenal. And again, I'm thinking, I don't think I could do that. I think I would shy away from that. I'm a little conflict averse. But he didn't. He saw it differently, and he was willing to engage, even with media personalities who disagreed with him. He would say, "Hey, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about our differences here." And I think that is a really important example that I hope that Gen Z and our culture begins to embrace that dialogue again. That we will, as a country, talk about our differences civilly, and we won't, resort to the labeling and accusing people of being racist and just name calling our opponents, but really dialogue. I think America needs to dialogue again in that way.
Why do you think this tragedy struck so deeply on a national level? I mentioned earlier an entire stadium filled with people, almost 100,000 people, and hundreds of thousands more online watching. I mean, what exactly is it that he can have this impact among people who actually never even met Charlie?
Well, I think part of it is that he's a young man, right? He's 31 years old when he died. And when we look at someone like Billy Graham, who lived a very full life into old age, that's one thing. But when someone dies young, when entertainers have died young, that's always really struck a chord with people to see someone so young pass away. And I loved what his wife Erica said about that he left things incomplete. His work was incomplete, but he didn't have unfinished business. And what she meant was he was someone who made the most of the opportunity he had. He lived loudly, he lived boldly, and he didn't leave anything on the playing field. He lived that way. And I think that's a testament. I think that's attractive to people too, is to realize, wow, he was able to do this. And there's the Broadway musical Hamilton has a song called Nonstop. And it was as if, Alexander Hamilton wrote essays as if he was running out of time. And of course, he died from a gunshot, in his 50s. But that's sort of what I think of when I think of Charlie Kirk, is I think a little bit of Alexander Hamilton and how Charlie lived in the same way Hamilton lived, as if he was running out of time. And I think that's a message that resonates with us today. I know it does with me.
Okay, speaking of which, you've also said before that Charlie understood that gratitude was essential to a free society that values liberty, and that is very important. Can you elaborate on that idea for us?
Sure. Well, I've been writing a book that's not out yet, but it's about gratitude and how gratitude was essential to our development as a nation. And when I looked back at some of the interviews with Charlie, he talked about having gratitude for America. And he said this: when you're not thankful for something, why would you want to conserve that something? If you're not thankful for our country, of course you would want to support a revolution to, get rid of it essentially. And so he saw that gratitude was important. And I think that's a theme that I'd really like to see come to fruition as we celebrate our 250th birthday next year. That we are grateful for the great things in our nation's history. And that is something that he championed, that he believed. And that, I think, is a really important part, that we develop more of a gratitude culture and less of a grievance culture. People want to be happier, and that's one way to do it.
And speaking of the 250th anniversary, can you also comment on why is morality essential? Just finally, last question here. Why is morality
Sure.
essential to the Constitution's endurance, just as legal
Well,
safeguards is?
that's right. So there's legal safeguards in it, but the people who implement those safeguards have to have morality and ethics for it to work. If you have corruption, it's not going to work. And you're not going to have a fair judicial system or make laws that are fair to people. You really do need people with ethics and morality. And I think that's something that our society's been working through and trying to understand and develop, especially in the past, few years.
Well, okay, Jane, always enjoy speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much.